So I'm Mark Richman. I'm CEO of Skeleton Key. Here's more than you'd ever want to know about me unless you looked at the slides already. Probably the most important thing on here, or maybe several things I'd want to point out, is my background is in IT. So I was originally more of a general IT person. I came out of theater and architecture. The hours of money was way better in IT. So I went into IT, and I got very quickly into networking and understanding how networks work and how packets move around, and just enough to be able to understand what made systems perform well. I was at a large organization in New York City, and they had a big creative team, and they were killing the network. This is early 90s, late 80s, when there was very few switches and high-performance networks out there. And so kind of troubleshooting those kinds of performance bottlenecks was in my blood when I started Skeleton Key, and that was a hybrid IT and development shop. And I brought a lot of that kind of prior experience in IT into the application development. Also, I have 4 sons, and so a lot of the lessons I'll be talking about here is really about teaching fundamentals, not getting into very specific scenarios. If I can teach you how to drive a car, then you can drive anywhere, but you have to start with learning how the car operates. Everything else there you can read and ask me about questions later if you're interested. Let's get going. So this is not a new topic. I didn't have enough room on the slide to include all the times this topic has been talked about by me. And there's a lot of other people who have presented and created content on blogs of various competitors and colleagues and collaborators. This started for me in 2010 because I missed one of the, I didn't go to all the conferences, but I've been to 20 to 25 of them or something like that. And I missed 2009 because one of my 4 sons was being born, and it was right around the same day, and I didn't want to risk not being there. And then someone texted me from the conference and said, man, they're having this new session. It's called an Under the Hood session, and they're talking about networks and latency, and I don't think anybody in the room understands what the hell they're talking about, pardon my language, and I think you would really enjoy it. And so they sent me the slides afterwards, and I immediately understood what they were talking about, and so I presented on developing for Maximum WAN Performance. It was a surprising hit, and then it led to an opportunity to talk about all different aspects of building solutions to perform. But I've always really kept it at a very basic level, and I'm going to keep it there today, and I'm not going to get into a lot of detailed edge cases, and I'll mention this later in the slides. I'm really going to focus on the broad strokes. And I'm going to work with Rosemary and the team at Claris to try to re-expose a lot of this old content to the newer audiences. There's a lot of details I couldn't put in today's deck that are in those screenshots of schema and samples of scripts and diagrams that illustrate concepts, and I've even got some stuff from webinars I did that never made it into the community, and they're recorded, but I have the PowerPoint from the webinar, so we're going to try to resurrect that material and make it available to the community as well. So audience participation time. I'd like to know, why do you think solutions underperform? Just call out.
Bad design.
Resources. Bad architecture.
Architecture, resources.
Moving too much data.
Too much
Running
data.
summaries.
Summaries.
Unstored calcs.
Unstored calcs.
Indexing.
Indexing.
Inefficient
Broken
relationships.
Inefficient relationships. Yes, 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 yes. The reality is that solutions underperform because of us. All right? We don't plan well, we don't architect well, we don't design well, we don't implement well, we don't deploy well. And yes, at some point, and some people out there bang this drum really loudly, there are limitations inherent to the platform. They continue to optimize and improve the platform. They also extend the platform. And as a result, things that work don't necessarily work well at scale. We all know what it's like to build a solution on our laptop. Works really well. And then 3 years later, full of data with 100 users, it's not working so well. And that's because we're building what we can, maybe not necessarily building how we should. And so my focus today is understanding ABCs of how FileMaker works, so you can build solutions with that in mind, as opposed to just pursuing your goal, mindlessly creating checks your future self will have to cache. So, John, what we will and won't cover today. Core concepts, straightforward techniques, 20% of what you need to know to get 80% of the value, in my opinion. I'm not going to get into edge cases and argue one function versus the other. I'm not going to talk about infrastructure beyond a simple slide that waves my hands at it. These are all important things, those last 2 sections, but that's not for today, and it's not for me. As I mentioned previous to the recording, I'm no longer building solutions on the daily. I build and tinker for myself. I do more discovery and intake for new clients and maybe general consulting on solutions and performance consultations, but rolling up my sleeves and building a solution for a client, I'd be the worst person in my company other than my marketing person to do that. So there's better people here, and I've got a list of some of the names outside of my team that I recommend you hunt down at this conference or on the community to ask those questions. So let's talk about high level first, and then I'll give you some takeaways that you can use. So we want to understand how FileMaker behaves. And I like to think about this like I mentioned before. It's like learning to drive a car, right? You don't just get in and start driving. You have to understand acceleration and braking, safety, signaling, how to stop at the line and not past the line when you get to a stop sign. If anyone here, right, show of hands, ever taught a teenager how to drive? Yeah, I'm on my third. It's the same thing. Fundamentals precede actual kind of improvisation, right? Eventually, you don't even think about driving, but you have to teach them the basics first. Fortunately and unfortunately, Claris makes it easy for us to dive in and just build solutions. We can literally get in there and start building stuff, not even thinking really too hard about what it takes to build them. It's just easy to do. And we kind of skip over the fundamentals, and then we build these solutions, and they work really well on our laptop, and we host them, and they work well for a while. And like I said earlier, they stop working so well eventually because we didn't really understand the car we were driving. Same is true of cooking, maybe playing an instrument. If you don't understand musical theory, if you don't understand ingredients, how they combine, what order to put them in, you can really end up with a very different kind of experience at the end. So I'm going to cover these general topics here at the beginning. The first is a topic called latency. And I wish I could have better diagrams for this, but I didn't want to overwhelm you guys with too much technical stuff. Latency, the concept here is basically how long it takes things to happen. So the traffic jam in my brain is the way I think about it. If you have a really uncongested highway and you're driving a car, you can get from point A to point B really quickly. If it's congested, you can't get from point A to point B. Same car, same destination, just takes longer. If you're in a large vehicle, all right, or let's say a truck loaded with goods, you can go on that same highway as that car, and you probably aren't going to get there as fast as the car because you just can't safely drive at that pace. And it's even worse for that truck in traffic because they don't have the maneuverability that a car might have. Latency is really impacted by a lot of things you can't control. This has to do with the physical distance between the client and the server, or between that server and some other data source that it's accessing. I'm going to have to do with the bandwidth that's available on the network, which is a variable that changes over time depending on the congestion on that network and how many other people are doing what at that time. And then how much data you're moving. And so this is going to be an underlying thing like the traffic. Like you plan to get back to your hotel or to get to dinner on time, and then you run into the real world, in the wide world, and suddenly things don't go as planned. And you've all experienced that if you host anything in the cloud. And even on a private network, depending on the time of day when backups are running or other activities are taking place. So the reason it's good to know about this is because this is the context in which everything else is happening. So when I start to talk about how important it is to not waste time sending information you don't need over the wire, I'm trying to help you avoid unexpected traffic jams that you have no control over. If you don't need the highway, then the highway has no impact on you. And that way, only when you need it, you use it, and then you get out of it. And so the goal here, I think, is to remain as nimble and lightweight as you can to avoid the areas of congestion. So if that's the highway, I like to think of schema as the surface roads. That's all local to your solution. It's how the data is connected. And really, schema is a very passionate topic for people. Instantly, people start to talk about approaches to the relationship graph. But really, it's two topics. It's your data model, which I could draw on that whiteboard. It has nothing to do necessarily with FileMaker explicitly. It's the tables and the relationships between them, the foreign keys, the primary keys, the kind of logic about how your information relates. You know, parents to children, items, and an invoice to the invoice itself, to the products. And then there's your relationship graph, which is completely convoluted. It is an expression of how that data model is going to be used by you as a developer. And there's lots of opinions out there about the way to do that and the right way to do that. But a lot of this boils down to the more complex that relationship graph is, the more that FileMaker has to consider all the different interactions between all those different table occurrences to do anything it's going to do. So there may be some value to designing a relationship graph in a certain way, but I'm not going to debate those today. Those are great for Cafe Mac over a beer kind of conversations. And there's going to be a zealot on one side telling you, here's one way to do the relationship graph, and a zealot on the other side telling you this another way. And neither are really right or wrong. First and foremost, we have to get the data model right. Then we have to be mindful of the impact of our development approaches in the relationship graph to understand that we're not just doing things there that we could do other ways, so we can keep that as simple as possible. So when I mentioned before that some of those other resources I have diagrams and examples of this, that's the kind of stuff I'm going to try to share after this session. So watch for some kind of activity in the community, I think over the next quarter or two about performance. I think some of that material will be resurrected for you. This is probably one of the most fundamental topics, though, that you can actually really quickly grasp, because I think the previous two gets a little bit into networking and IT and how networks work, and the other one is really about the relationship graph, which is hard enough to get right for your data model, much less limit yourself to doing what you know you can do in the relationship graph to solve problems, is understanding how FileMaker works with records. FileMaker considers a record an object. It's the easiest way to think about it. The record moves together as one pile of data. It's not atomic and individualized. Now, there are exceptions I'm going to talk about. For the most part, though, if I have a table, and let's just say there's no summaries, there's no calculations, there's no containers, it's just text and numbers and timestamps and just a bunch of those fields. If I modify any one of those fields and commit that record, that whole record gets sent to the server. And when I ask for a record and say, hey, I just want to see this one field from that record, just that one text field, it says, OK, and it sends me the whole record. There is no particulate send you this field or send you this field. There's a couple of fields that behave that way, and we're going to talk about them in a slide or two. But generally, it's really important to understand that when I talk about a record, I'm talking about the whole thing. Yes?
And how about records in a portal?
Well, same thing. If I see a record in a portal and I see one field, like, related students in the class, and I see Mark Richman is the student, all the other data that's available about Mark Richman in that student table is coming along for the ride. That's right.
Even container views?
No, that's one of the exceptions I'm going to get to in another slide. You're going to be my guy for questions, John. The other thing to know is that in order to make things feel snappier already, and a lot of these things are good things. I mean, I'm not trying to say anything negative about this. It was designed in the way, this is like the underpinnings of Draco and the engine and how FileMaker is designed from the very beginning. And there's some things that were done deliberately to make the experience better. So another concept is this idea of prefetch. When you go into a table of records, and even if you're in a form view, if there's hundreds of records in the table, FileMaker is going to prefetch the first 25 records. And if you're in a list view, I think it's going to show you all the records you got, maybe up to 50. I forget the exact number. But the main deal here is that even if you're going to form view and finding a single record, it is going to prefetch the next batch of records in that found set so that they're ready to go if you need them.
As a list view, it fetches the number that will fill the screen.
Yes,
and then
thank
when you
you.
scroll, it fetches the next one.
Thank you. So it wasn't a question, it was a comment. So it'll show all the records you see, it'll get them. But I believe, and I'm not entirely sure, I'm going from old Intel, that even if there's only 18 records shown in that list view, I believe it'll still prefetch the minimum of 25.
They may have changed behavior, didn't used to.
All right. The main goal here is, regardless of the quantity, of the exact number, is you may think you're getting one record, you're getting other records too. So again, back to my original point, you don't need those other records. You might not need those other records. You might not even need the first record you're looking at. We all know when you open up the file, it's going to open up to the layout that you last left it on as a developer, right? As long as you're developing on a server, then it's going to open up to the last layout before it was uploaded to the server. There's some basic behaviors of how things behave when you host them. But even if you're just working locally and you close it on the invoices view, when you open it up, it's in the invoices view, even if your startup script says, now go to this other view. And guess what you just did? You just read 25 invoice records, give or take. And so what I'm getting at there is, if you manipulate records, if you go to layouts, and there are records that start to get triggered on that, you're usually getting even more than what you can see. So accidents happen, and I want to try to give you the fundamentals so you can avoid the accidents. Get the data you want, don't get the data you don't want, stay off the highway. So to John's point, there are some different behaviors for certain fields. Container fields are one of them. Summaries are another one. Unstored calculations are another one. These fields move when you see them. And by see them, I mean, yes, literally see them on the screen. 1 pixel of that field is visible to you. It could also be if you reference that field in a calculation, if you touch it in a script step, if you do anything that invokes that field, that calls it to be understood or recognized or used in some way, now that container data is going to move to you. Now that other summary field is going to move. And if it's a summary field or it's an unstored calc, then all the records that summary field is summarizing, or all the records those unstored calculations are summarizing, they're going to move to you as well. So we're going to talk about techniques later about how to avoid some of these avalanches, but The key thing to know is that it's safe to have containers, it's safe to have calculations, it's safe to have summaries. It's about when you see them and use them that you start to move data. So don't not use them, but learn how to use them when you need them and use them with the right sets of records. So again, you keep the information you need and not the information you don't need. Yes, sir.
I hate to ask, maybe you already covered this, but if I am grabbing one field from a hidden table and including it on the layout, this first table, now getting both bundles.
So the question is, if I include one field from a related table, I'm going to assume just a regular text or number field, some related value, right? I'm going to say, for example, let's say you're looking at a line item and you're showing the product photo, or maybe you're showing the product SKU number or something, right? Does that bring a batch? It'll bring the bundle for that one record that you're showing. It'll bring all the other fields that describe that item whose field you're showing. If I show the SKU for the item, I'm also getting the description, the manufacturer, the vendor, all the other fields you might have in that table. I'm not getting its container fields, I'm not getting its unstored calcs or its summaries, but I am going to get all the other normal fields, right? The text, the date, the timestamp, and so on. When was it created, when was it modified, like all that extra payload we need as developers. But I'm not going to get 25 of those. I'm just going to get the one that I'm referencing. So it's different than a portal, because in that case you're referring to one related record. Maybe it's driving a relationship. That could be different. If that getting to that one related record is a simple join, then yeah, you're just getting that one record. If you're getting a sorted portal, like I want to get the most recent related record, or I'm sorting them by creation order, I'm sorting them, well, not creation orders by default, but I'm sorting them by some other field, some other value, then it might actually be loading all the data it needs to sort that for me in order to give me the result I want. Now, some of that stuff, when I get into sorting and filtering and summarizing batches of records, the server's doing for us these days. Okay? If I go all the way back to 2010, the server wasn't very smart, or at least not as smart as it is now. And it would let the client do all that. So it would just send you what you asked for, whether you knew you were asking for it or not, and then you would figure it out on the local client. Now, without your being really able to know when, the server is saying, I think I can sort this for you, and then send you what you want. I can sort those 2,000 records and send you the first 18 in your list view, the ones that are now sorted to the top, as opposed to in the past where it would send you all the records and then sort them on the client. But the server's really busy. Maybe it'll send you all those records. Same with summarization. It'll try to summarize it and send you the summary, so you don't have to load all those records to summarize it. But if the server's really busy, maybe it'll actually send it to you because you're less busy. So I have a reference at the end about the automagic things that happen when the server steps in to do things for you when it can. But there are certain things you can't control that it will do. Key thing to know here too is that some fields trigger one or the other. So if you get a container field or you get an unstored calc or a summary, you're going to get all those other fields too. But if you just get the text or the number fields, you're not going to get those special fields unless you see them. The nice thing about all this is we're going to be able to use all these concepts I'm talking about to get better performance from your solutions. We're going to talk about how you can implement these in different ways to actually get the results you want. So, in for a penny, in for a pound. What causes this data to move? So I used that word before, invoke. It's the best word I've been able to come up with because trigger now means something, right? But that would be maybe the more common way to think about it. Something triggers something to happen, like a gunshot in an avalanche, right, or a loud noise. Typically, the kinds of things that invoke data to start moving, especially at scale, is when you sort records, summarize records, or reference records through a portal or relationship that's sorted or summarized in some way. Those are the kinds of actions that can accidentally start an avalanche of data to your solution, actually from the server to you as a client. So common occurrences where those kinds of avalanches happen are in scripting, conditional formatting, right? We might say, and we've all seen this in some solutions where you've got a conditional format and it's checking to see whether something's in stock or how many records there are so that it can show a status as green or red. And of course, and as the number of records it has to evaluate to decide what format to display gets bigger, suddenly, or as your list view gets longer because you have a bigger screen, so now you're looking at 30 records on the screen, each of which has to do conditional formatting on a batch of related records. I'm thinking like an invoice view, which is trying to show me is the invoice been filled by all the line items, whether those have been fulfilled. All of that kind of combination of elements could lead to an avalanche of data coming to you because you applied a very easy to apply conditional formatting to get a really useful piece of intelligence on a screen when you're developing, not at scale, and then you deploy this to people who are spread across the world using highways to communicate, not surface roads like you are on your desktop, and latency kicks in, and they're really feeling the pain. They need that information. You've got to figure out other ways to get them that information than conditional formatting, or other ways than the conditional formatting calculation you're using, which is based on related records, realizing that you thought you were just checking one field in those related records, but you were getting the whole payload. Layout calculations are great. Everyone loves them because you don't have to create calculations and then put those as merge variables or do script steps and so on. But layout calculations are unstored. They're dynamically calculated. Even if they're calculated on values that are in the table you're in, they still have to be dynamically crafted. And so they're another example of a conditional formatting as something that you're paying a little price for. They're safe to use if you're doing things that are local, that are known, that are based on a field that's not being displayed, that you want to be able to show something. You don't want to take up a checkbox on the field showing status is complete. You want to change something to green to show it's complete. That's all fine. That's all data you already have. It's when you reach across related tables, when you reach across multiple related tables to create a calculation, that you're basically getting with conditional formatting and layout calculations a lot of unstored, on-the-fly, potentially cascading avalanche-type activities. To this day, to last week, my team had a client, big complex solution, working just great. This big list view just crawled. Suddenly it was like taking minutes to resolve and scroll. It was painful. And the culprit was conditional formatting. Client had come up with a logic of how they wanted to do it. It included execute SQL statements. It was a really smart conditional formatting, really poorly implemented. It crushed the layout, and it crushed the performance for 47 users, crushed the server, and just getting to figure it out was a pain. Like we had to take it offline, hypotheses, and of course, turns out it was that. But I saw that same problem back in 2009. Actually, that was too early. It must have been more like 2013 with conditional formatting. Shortly after it came out, I built a really cool conditional format on a layout, and it wasn't working, and it wasn't working, and the reason it wasn't working is because it had a bad path. Like I asked for a context for a relationship that it couldn't resolve. And it didn't just throw an error, it just tried and tried and tried and tried and tried. Kind of like if you open up an old file, if anyone's done that and it's looking for the file reference to a file that doesn't exist anymore, it doesn't just instantly fail, it hunts and hunts and hunts and hunts, and then eventually it fails. This thing just minutes of staring at a blank screen before it would finally land and the data would be wrong. I'd go to layout mode, I'd think I'd found it, I'd go back to browse mode, and then I'd wait minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes until I finally found it was my own conditional formatting. And that's 12, 13 years later, the same problem can easily crop up from developer error. It's great functionality, got to use it the right way. Relationships and portals is another place where this can happen, with sorting and summarizing and filtering. These are all very powerful when they're used correctly, but if you're using them incorrectly, or you're complicating your relationship graph in an effort to come up with the functionality you want, and I'm going to talk about, again, solutions for these things, you can also trigger those avalanches. So that example that you asked about would just show that one field in that portal because I need to see it. What are you trying to do? Is that the right way to do it? Is that a price you're willing to pay? And if you need to do it that way, is there another technique you can use to get that information without getting all the extra data you don't want? And the last place I've seen it come up a lot is privilege sets, where people go into privilege sets, they want to define some kind of conditional access, right? Very good place to do something smart, like let me see these records or edit these records on the third Friday of the month, but only if I'm the owner of the record, et cetera, and so forth. And next thing you know, deep inside your solution, you have equivalent to an unstored calc being evaluated across a cascade of records that's triggering an avalanche just to decide if you can see the record you're looking at. So again, have to figure out, we all know, there's a lot of ways to skin the cat in FileMaker. No offense to cat lovers. Like you can do a lot of great things. The way you can do it easily isn't always the best way to do it. And so it's just understanding how come it works that way. All this boils down to, am I moving the wrong data over the slowest lines possible or lines and highways I can't control? Is making sure that you understand also that you get the records you want, because FileMaker is keeping track of the records you have and it's keeping track of all the records that your colleagues have. So what happens is when I get, let's say I open up a list view and I get 18 records, 20 records, whatever it is. And you open up the same list view and you get the same 20 records. And then I go in and I edit a few records and I make changes to them. Well, it knows you had those 20 records. And it knows I had those 20 records. And I just sent my updates up and it tells everybody else who had those same 20 records, hey, dump that data. But if they're in that list view, it's now going to send them an update of that record. They didn't care about that record, probably. It was just in their list view. But they just owned it. They own that record, they have a copy of that record, and now they're going to get a fresh copy of that record. So they didn't need it in the first place. They maybe don't even need it in the second place, and you can just multiply that by a bunch of users. So controlling the found set that users are operating with and limiting how many times you're sending that data back up to limit the amount of communication and unnecessary traffic down to those other users is really a way to be a good citizen in that communication. Now, to be really clear, if I'm not looking at those records right now, if we both log into that same list view, and you get 18 records, I get 18 records, then I go somewhere else and I'm doing something else, all it's going to do is tell me to dump that data from my cache on my computer. It's just going to say, hey, those records have changed. It's not going to send them to me because I'm not looking at them anymore. They're not on my screen anymore, right? I got them and they were kind of wasted time and energy coming down to me. And then I moved to another context or another layout, and so FileMaker knows I had them. It doesn't know if I'm going to need them again. It's wonderful if I go back to that list view and they haven't changed, I already have them. But if I go somewhere else, it does at least tell me to dump that data. So there is some kind of communication that comes down to me. There's a little bit of noise. It could just be like a quick text message. Hey, dump that data. You don't need it anymore. But if I happen to be on that same list view and I'm still not using those records, it's not just going to tell me to dump the data. It's going to say, dump that data and here's some fresh data. And that could happen over and over and over. So I'm not even doing anything. I'm not even sitting at my computer and it's receiving data because I happen to be looking at a view that happens to have records in it that I don't care about that other people are changing.
So does that work if you've got two windows open, one's active and one's not?
I believe it doesn't matter how many windows. Yes, the question is, does it work? It matters if the windows are there and you're looking at them, then yes. I don't honestly think, even if the window is nested behind the other one, that it would not do that. That's not the same as a freeze window or something. I don't know if it's knowing what the operating system, like which window, it's possible. If it's in the foreground or the background, that until you flip it to the foreground, and then you'll pay the penalty right then. But my gut tells me that if it says, hey, you've got that record, it's in a window, you're in that layout, that record is visible, that it's going to send you that fresh data. And if it doesn't, you're just a step away from getting that fresh data. You'll all get the update that that record changed. And that's really just, hey, dump record ID blank from your cache, it's changed. It might, and that's very lightweight, saying to just, hey, ignore what you have, it's old, could be out of date. It's that accidental send it to me again that I'm trying to avoid. So for me, this boils down to get people the records they want, don't give them the records they don't want, and try to minimize the number of times you send unnecessary updates to the server. Let's talk techniques. One more of these, I'm going to consolidate and get into actual practical things you can do. You've heard this before, I'm going to repeat it again, not going to go very deep on this. All the material on this from the past is still pretty much current, so as I resurrect that old material, it'll be useful. Themes and styles really do matter. If you're working with any legacy solutions and you have yet to update those layouts, the custom formatting you have on your objects on your screens is a price you're paying every time you use your solution. I know that the structure of a file, right, the layouts and the screens of the file aren't necessarily the most expensive part of your file. Right? They're going to be loaded and they're more or less available to your users to use. There is some overhead for processing those, to render them. Right? So this is just another layer of performance. If I have CSS working for me and I've got themes and styles that are all uniformly organized and I don't have a bunch of, oh, and by the way, this object also has bold on it and also it has italics on it and it also has a color on it, and that somehow is unique to that object. It has less information to store, and when it goes to render that screen, because I went from one screen and back, it has less information to think through to render it. So, yes?
I did a session on this last year.
Yes.
The style, so that's available if you want to go look at it. It's basically making the same point you're making right now. The other thing is Clay had confirmed that when you open the file, that's when the theme gets loaded, right when you open it. So all of the information to style the objects happens right at the beginning, and when you render the layout, nothing extra that gets loaded unless you have custom formatting.
Right.
And then at that point, that's when that gets loaded.
Thank you. Alexis, right? Yeah. All right. Thank you, Alexis. So Alexis's point for the recording is still behaves this way. okay? Custom formatting on objects is still a lot of overhead. And themes and styles, you load them once, you keep them. And honestly, and I'm guessing this is true, maybe you can confirm for me, Alexis, that FileMaker since FileMaker 15 has been caching record and other information about your file on your machine in a temp file, secured and encrypted inside your temporary folder, whether you're Mac or Windows. That's wonderful, because the next time you open up your file, it pretty much knows a lot of stuff about your file, and it just checks to the server, hey, has this changed? Is the file, I'm guessing the theme's the same, or the style's the same? Is the schema the same? It doesn't have to download all of that structure again. It can just sort of jump in. In fact, if the records that you were working with are the same, it might be able to just pick up where it left off with that records. And so that's why you've probably all seen, if you log into a solution, it's new, it hasn't been open for a while, you haven't been in there over 2 weeks, there's a bit of a price you might pay when it does whatever you have it doing at startup. But then if you come back the next day and you log in, it might be like, boom, wow, why is that so much faster? And it's that caching that it does since FileMaker 15. It's not just the server that caches things, it's the client that caches things.
Wouldn't it cache the custom format?
It would cache the custom format, yes, and then you're getting into the rendering cost associated with it. I believe so. If it's caching the structure, it's caching all of the structure. If the structure isn't really changing, then it just has to check and see if anything's changed, like a checksum operation. And that's a bit of a guess how it's doing it. Don't quote me on that. But I'm going to guess that the issue there really becomes down to rendering. So some of the diagrams I think I've showed, and it's probably true in Alexis in your presentation, is there's kind of layers of rendering that take place, in terms of first it's looking at the themes and the styles, and then it's looking at conditional custom formatting, and it's looking conditional formatting on top of it. And the rendering engine has to go through those first two layers really quick, because that's all preloaded and it's all optimized. And then it starts to go, well, what's unique to this object? And how many objects on this layout have that uniqueness? And so it has to render each of those different things. And if you have a really complicated layout with lots of overlapping objects and all kinds of other things going on, you're talking about I think of it as just like a stack of cards. And it has to read through all the cards to get to rendered. And then you leave that layout, come back, and it reads all those cards and renders again. And that might be infinitesimal microseconds over dozens of users all day long. That adds up. So you want it to be a snappier app? You want to use themes and styles. I'm beating a dead horse. No offense to people who love horses. All right, synthesis, big picture. Control latency if you can. That gets into infrastructure, which I'm not going to talk about. If you can control latency, do, right? Provision resources appropriately, put servers close to your users, don't put too much on a server at once. As you think about AI and LLMs and where you host those things, consider using multiple servers to kind of balance loads. But if you can't control it, plan for it. And the best way to plan for it is keep your schema normal and lean. Be mindful of when you're moving records. Don't move records you don't need to move. Remember that all fields aren't the same. Avoid triggering lots of data moving that you don't want to move. Limit unnecessary communication. Commits are where communication takes place. You make a change, you commit the record, boom. So we're going to talk about transactions and some of the things that can help alleviate that. But it's really hard sometimes to know when commits are taking place until you start to get a sense of where they probably could take place and what you're doing that could be causing them to happen. And then be really intentional, efficient. And Alexis is one of those folks who's really leading the charge there on UX and UI, so she's a great resource. Maxim, overall, less is more. The simpler your solution is, the leaner your solution is, and the less you send to users unnecessarily of any type or stripe of information in your system, the snappier it will feel. All right, so let me give you some practical techniques you can use. I'm trying to cover, not necessarily in the same order I covered them a moment ago, but layouts, schema, scripting, calculations, summary fields. There's a lot more to talk about, but in the interest of time and your questions, I want to get through it. So be thematic, use styles, avoid custom things. If you need it to look different than the themes that come, go ahead and create a custom theme. You can use the minimalist theme as a really great way to start because they're pretty bare bones. We actually have a tool we've built at Skeleton Key called Simple Color Swap that you can find in the marketplace, which is a really good tool for diving into the CSS underneath themes and making them even leaner. It'll let you find similar colors and collapse them into one color, for example. And just eliminate extra little this and that. I know, isn't that kind of spooky when it does that? So that's a really great tool. It's built by one of my developers, Jeremy Upton, who has a presentation on UX tomorrow, where he's talking about moderated usability testing. But that's his pet project on the side. This idea that there's a better way to work with the themes, and we don't really have a lot of tools inside FileMaker yet to allow us to kind of tweak the CSS or match a logo to a color and a brand and really kind of make sure we kind of get those things to be even more optimal if we can. And the PDF's got a link in there for you to go to find that and download it. It's free. You can use it. It's an add-on. It's really simple to use. There's a lot to learn about UX. Alexis and Mercuria from Beeswax and Jeremy, my colleague, and others are really great resources for that. Building interfaces that are simple and easy to use is probably the second most important thing after using themes and styles, because then you're not building interfaces that are complex and cluttered. And I had it in a lot of my other presentations, but I haven't mentioned it yet. A complex layout may be really powerful, but it's a real pain to maintain. I know they showed us how cool it would be to be able to group and ungroup and modify things inside of a group, and that's great. But a simple, leaner layout will just load faster because there's less on it. It might be better to have 3 layouts for the price of 1, even though you could do it on 1. And so less is more, less is more, less is more. This is especially true when you get into WebDirect and Go in particular. Go, those devices just don't have the processing power of a laptop. They just don't. And so the less complicated layouts are for rendering on a mobile device, really important, but really no less valuable on a desktop. Granted, WebDirect does some more on the server for you, and then it sends it to the browser, but that's still time for the server to process it, and the server's doing lots of other things. And then, of course, you're going to get what you ask for. So your layout is the lens through which you invoke data. So yes, you can hide objects. Yes, you can nest and put panels and sliders and not show the portal you don't need unless you really need it. These are great techniques, but you need to control that. Whether you put them on another layout or you hide them on the layout you're on, whatever your preference is in terms of design and control, that is the moment of impact for most of the places we invoke, other than scripts, which we'll talk about shortly.
What about the hiding and showing functionality and the complexity of those, how those?
So the calculation engine, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, is the most ubiquitous element. I'm really glad they mentioned that today in the keynote, because I've been saying that since 2010. It's like the most ubiquitous element in the platform. It's everywhere. And so the calculation itself could potentially have a performance impact, but a lot of those hide conditions are pretty simple, right? I'm in browse mode, I'm in find mode, or something simple like they demonstrated today. So if that evaluates and says don't hide the object, then there's no rendering time for that object. That's not being loaded. And if that object has a portal in it which shows related records, then you're not paying a price. It's not like it's rendering it and loading it and then hiding it, right? It's smart enough to hide the stuff it should hide first, right? And I'm not even knowing that's true, but I'm confident it's true. I'll be honest, like I haven't tested that scenario, right? That's an edge case which I could go in and I could set up a Wireshark monitor and put a lot of data on an object and set it to hide or not hide, and then see how much data moves from client to server and dump my cache, so it's a really clean test. But I'd be shocked if the engineers haven't said, look, we have to evaluate these things in an order so that we don't load unnecessary information. Why load a hidden portal, right? All right. And I mentioned here, use blank layouts. So this is going to come in really handy when it comes down to controlling what data moves, all right? So I'm going to save that. But it seems weird to have a blank layout, but you're going to see here in a minute when we talk about records and moving data around, having a blank layout can be really useful because there's nothing on it. So you're not going to risk moving a summary or an unstored calc or a container field. And you're not going to load any rendering information because there's really nothing there to render. You might still prefetch 25 records, but you definitely aren't getting all the other junk. And then you have to pick your battles, right? You can't always not get any data. It's a database. All right. Normalizing your data. I have a whole session on one-to-many relationships a few years ago. I could talk about this for 45 minutes happily. The key thing here, I think, is all those bullets speak for themselves. A narrow table. For normalizing your data, if anyone hasn't read any books on relational theory or relational database design, go read one. We all kind of figured this stuff out. Most of us, I did. I didn't read one for the first 10 years I was a developer, so true confessions. I just kind of did what I thought made sense. And then I went and I read a big book about relational theory, and I was like, oh, wow, there's a whole science to this. Not just one-to-many, but one-to-one. And we get all these great tools, again, we figure out how to use Cartesian joins and all kinds of multiple predicates in the relationship graph, but let's forget all that and just focus on, do I have the right data structure, data model for my business problem, and it is efficient? And then you get into some of these edge cases, like, all right, well, how wide is this table getting? All right, is this becoming like a table that could be split into 2 or 3 tables? Are these data all used at the same time, or is like this group of fields, maybe it's all kinds of information that describes Mark. Maybe it's not even relational. Maybe it's like Mark's childhood, and then Mark's middle age, and then his favorite foods, and then his favorite hobbies and sports, and then all the certifications he has, and whatever. Maybe it just doesn't make sense to make this data set relational. But could you potentially put those in separate tables and then join them together with Mark's ID? So that when you load Mark's information, you load the core stuff. And then when you bring up the tab or the screen that shows his certification history, you see that stuff. And then when you want to show his favorite books, you see that stuff. And you're just kind of piecemealing out the pieces of that record in chunks. It feels like a bit artificial to slice that up, but it can be really powerful. When I get a client solution to look at as an intake person in our sales team, the first thing I do is open up the table view, scroll through, and see how many fields, how many fields, how many fields. And if I see something with a 1 and 2 other digits afterwards, my antenna go up, right? I like to see 30s and 20s and 60s and 40s and 10s. That starts to me instantly feel like it's probably a normalized solution. When I see hundreds or 400, true confessions, anyone here have a solution out there with over 200 fields in the table? Okay, it happens. Now, some of those fields may be summary fields and unstored calculations that you need in various places. I get it. But when you look at just those other fields, the fields that move automatically with the payload, you get some really wide tables out there. So one way you can do is to isolate noisy fields. Let's say, for example, you have a product table with lots of fields in it. And then you've got a field that shows is it in stock or is it out of stock. And maybe this is a really popular item. It's constantly being sold out, and it's constantly being restocked. That's a really bad example, but the concept is that most of the fields stay the same all the time, but one field keeps changing. If I put that one field that keeps changing in with the other fields, every time it changes, everybody who's using that record gets a new record, and it gets committed, and it gets brought down, and it gets committed, and it gets brought down, up and down, round trips galore. But if I isolate that noisy field, the only thing that's moving is that one field. It's much smaller. There could be 50 other fields in that table, and this one noisy field is isolated. So that, again, feels artificial normalization, but we're normalizing it there for performance. We're normalizing the noisy field away from the rest, kind of like you might separate the, like I've got lots of dogs as well as lots of boys. One of the dogs sometimes is a bit of a troublemaker. I'll isolate that dog from the other dogs. It's real easy. Trouble stops. Another one is chunky fields. You have a solution that's got a bunch of regular old everyday fields, and then it's got a big text field. And the text field has got a manuscript in it, or it's got a product description in it, or it's just got thousands of characters of text in it, whatever it might have in it. That is a regular old text field. I think, what's the limit on text fields these days? Is it 4 gigabytes? Or it's big, right? A lot of text could be in that field. And some of our solutions we build, and in fact, they might even become bigger now with the ability to have AI craft abstract text for us. Those chunky text fields might be a special kind of payload. You might say, it's not noisy, but it's big. I don't need it all the time. I'm going to put it into a separate table. And then no matter what kind of activity is happening here with these little fields, that field, which more or less stays the same all the time, won't be pushed up and down all the time. I might even decide to put it on a tab or something, so I don't even load it until I look at it. But if it's part of the same table, I can't separate it, so I have to separate it in the schema. And then make use of one empty table. That one empty table with that blank layout is a magic tool for you to navigate through your solution like a ghost. If you can open up your solution to a blank layout with no data in it, and use that as sort of a touch point or a milestone or a waypoint as you're developing, you can kind of nimbly skip around things that you don't want to do to get empty-handed from the very beginning. Like log in and just have no data sent to them except for the structure, which they may already have loaded in their cache anyway. And then say, what does this person need to do? They need to work with open records in the invoices table. And then I can take them there, and we'll talk about how I would take them there in the best way in a second. Prune your graph. Use predicate filtering, use portal filtering, try to find ways to keep your graph as simple and use some of the more flexible techniques to get more bang for your buck. You could create 5 table occurrences, each with a static predicate, or you could find out one to get 5 out of 1 if you set up your predicates right and set the predicates as you need to. Maybe you have a global value, you set it on demand, and you can reuse the same relationship over and over, as opposed to having 5 dedicated table occurrences, which is now more overhead for the system to monitor every time things change. Similarly, you can do a lot of work at portal level with portal filtering. And again, the server will do what it can to help you with those things. But again, rather than clutter up the relationship graph, maybe I can have one relationship and then use various portal filters to get the subsets of records that I'd like. Learning Execute SQL and Execute Data API, there's some trade-offs there. You have to do some testing, but that's another great thing. Sometimes we find relationship graphs are cluttered with things that are used occasionally, or you were trying to solve a problem and this was the easiest, obvious way to do it. Just make a little table occurrence group, set up the customer relationship, now I've got what I want, and I don't have to worry about it anymore, it's solved. But maybe I could have used an Execute SQL or Execute Data API script step, and without any relationship at all, go get the data I needed on the fly and not add any extra overhead to my relationship graph. So there's a trade-off there. Is this something I'm going to lean on frequently? If so, does it make sense to incorporate it into the relationship graph and pay for it all the time, every time any of the tables in that table occurrence are affected even by other places on the graph? Or should I look at that more tactically, like when I need it, I'll go get it? And there's probably people out there who could do a session on a relationship graph with no relationships and how you could have just a bunch of table data and then just use execute commands everywhere to get what you want and bring it into virtual lists and display it. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but that's an extreme version of that version. But I think learning how to use these two techniques, you'll see opportunities to leverage them. And the moment to recognize you're about to go do the wrong way maybe is to say, am I about to go add something special to my relationship graph that isn't about the data model, but is about a use case or report or a particular layout thing I'm trying to do? And is there another way to do it? Can I go get what I want, throw it into a variable, and throw it on the screen?
Are you saying that if I have multiple occurrences of a table and I modify a record in one of those tables, the server has to consider the other occurrences?
So the way I've heard this described is that there's a small tax, right? Because it doesn't really know when you make a change to that record. It has to check what dependencies might be involved, right? I'm about to change this record. What records could this potentially affect, right? Whether I'm deleting it, I might need to delete children, right, or related records, or whether modifying this changes a calculation somewhere else that's unstored and being displayed for somebody else. So it kind of has to say, okay, well, hold on a second. A record in this table is changing. Where is that on the relationship graph? And oh, wow, there's 17 versions of it on the relationship graph. So what are all the different relationships? Now, that happens in microseconds. But we've seen some now, and I'm going to get into this in a second, but we've seen examples where, you know, the same data structure appears over and over in the relationship graph because it's from different perspectives. But there's nothing really exciting about each of those different table occurrence groups. It's the same invoice to line items. It's just invoice to line items from the product view, or invoice to line items from the customer view, or invoice to line items, and it's sort of redundant. And the reality is that there's a small tax to be paid for that redundancy, all right? It loads it all, it knows what it is, but it just has to think about, for a brief second there, like what's going on with the relationship graph, what effect could this have, because of all the different places that that might be used by all the different people using the system. In my brain, personally, the closer your relationship graph is to your data model, the closer you are to some kind of nirvana. I don't think it's possible, right? Maybe nirvana is possible, but it feels like it's elusive. But the simpler the relationship graph is, the better. I think I mentioned it on a previous slide, but I didn't call it out as a bullet. I was one of those people when they gave us FileMaker 7 and we had the relationship graph. The first thing that I realized and I loved the best was that all the relationships were suddenly bidirectional. I didn't have to have a relationship in one file to the other file and then from the other file back to the original. I could get 2 for 1. That is how relational models work. That's also how FileMaker works. So why would you squander that and add a second relationship to say the exact same thing but from the other direction? My son Oscar is my son and I am his father. One relationship will describe that. I don't need to have 2 where it says from my perspective he's my son and from his perspective I'm his dad, right? Now, There's reasons developers do that. Techniques, development ease, understanding their schema. Okay, I'm not going to debate that with you guys. There's a zealot out there who will debate the interconnected graph with you, and there's a zealot out there who will debate the anchor buoy with you, and they both have very good arguments for it. Regardless, the more stuff on your relationship graph, just like the more stuff on your layouts, the more FileMaker has to work to resolve the interconnectedness and dependencies. And those little bits add up over time. I didn't repeat the question, but I hope the answer on the recording is close enough. All right, scripting, empty found sets. All right, that's the whole thing I talked about, like open to a blank layout with no records in it. You didn't send any data you don't need. And you can, if you can't do it through navigation, then you can potentially do it with scripting. All right? In fact, I used to advocate for a, when you load a solution, run a script in freeze window that zeroes out the found set in every table. And now you're free to move about the cabin. You're not going to move any data unless you ask for the data, unless you do a find or go to related record or make a new record. There'll be no data in any table waiting for you. I actually advocated with the engineering team years ago to make the default state for a table to be empty as opposed to all records found. They have a good reason for doing that. I think focus groups back then showed people freaked out because they didn't know where their data was. Right? I'd love a flag for that, but you can script it. You can make it happen. And then when you fail gracefully, meaning error capture's on, nothing found, don't show me anything. How many times have you done the, I do a find, doesn't find anything, shows me the found set? All right, or shows me all records, and now I'm back to a bunch of data I didn't want. I was looking for something else, I didn't find it. Why would I want to see anything? I'd rather just have an object on the layout that's unhidden that says, sorry, we didn't find what you were looking for, please try again, as opposed to 18 or 20 or 30 records I didn't really care about in the first place.
If you do a find and you get one record, do I get one and the 25?
No, I believe you just get one. Great question. Question was, do I get a prefetch at 25 if I just find one? And I think the answer is no. But I'm going to write that one down to make sure. But I don't believe it will, because I don't think it would know which ones to prefetch. Right? So it's really when you have more than 25 records in a form view that it's going to prefetch 25. If you only have 20 records in your database, it would be hard-pressed to find 25. Scripting, in the interest of time, I'm going to cruise through these. All of this conversation has been to get you to think almost like you're down, I'm almost thinking like Tron, like you're down in the machine. You're flying over to understand how your data and the actions you're taking are impacting what's going to happen. So you have to plan your scripts and learn to predict what will move when. And question, do I understand what's really moving here? Do I understand what's not moving? When I first started thinking about this topic in 2010, there was a lot of hypotheses. I wonder what happens when I go to a layout and enter find mode. And that's how I discovered, oh, it sent me 25 records I didn't want before I went to find mode. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I didn't want that. So, oh, I can flip that around. I can enter find mode, and then I can go to the layout. And I got nothing. I entered find mode in a layout I already had data in. So nothing happened except the mode changed. Then I switched to the other layout. I'm still in find mode. No data's moving. And then I run my find. And then I fail gracefully. And if I find something, I get what I want. If I don't find anything, I get nothing. That flip of those two script steps from go to layout, enter find mode, go to layout, will save you 25 records per layout you were going to on an average basis over all your solutions for every user every day. If that's the only thing you take away from this session, go do that. Blah, 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 consider sequence, navigate around data like I talked about using blank layouts or entering find mode and going places and finding what you want, right? It's all the same thing over and over, just different ways of thinking about it in text as opposed to in pictures, which is what those other presentations I will share over the coming months will reveal. It's just ways to see this literally expressed in a script, but it really is thinking about. Now you can set up a Wireshark, like I said, you could put big payload records in there and you could watch this stuff happen, but the reality is it's happening. This has been happening since 2009, it's been happening since then, and I confirmed with Clay, for the most part, it's happening all the time, which is my segue to the middle column here, which is things are changing quickly at Claris. So I asked Clay a few weeks ago to confirm that some of this stuff was still true, and he said, yeah, all of it's still true. And then he brought up a couple things that he thinks are really kind of expensive, and one of them was set field. Because set field historically had an implied commit, which means if I went to a record And I said, set this, set this, set this, set this, set this, and we've all done that. Each of those was a round trip commit. First set field, set the field, committed the record, and sent it to the server and updated everyone who needed to know about it, and then brought back the next set field, did the same thing, same thing. And one of my colleagues in my team said, that's not true, that's not possible, And I was like, yeah, I just confirmed it. So I confirmed it with him again today. He said, yep, it's still the same. And then that started bugging him, and he came running up here before his session and said, I went and tested it, and they changed it with the transaction stuff. They modified set field so it would behave better whether it was in a transaction or not. So things are changing, right? But the key thing he said to remember, regardless of the bet I lost with my engineering team about that, was whether it's a set field or an insert from or any other script step that modifies the record or yuan, how confident are you that you know if the record is being committed and you're sending that whole record up or not? And that's the thing he said that's really tricky, is like, yes, this set field may have been optimized, but there are a dozen other pitfalls and trip hazards out there where you as a developer can modify a record and send the whole record up as a bundle. And the key thing is to be aware of that, and that is why transactions have become a thing. Because you always had open record and commit record. That's been there for a while, but very few of us admittedly used it, unless we ran into record locking and people complained, and then we implemented it just there. But generally, we didn't use it as a habit, even though we probably should have. Transactions seem complicated if you just think of them as simple as, hey, I just don't want anything to go to the server until I'm done doing what I'm doing. Then you can go hog wild in there. Set, insert from, copy, paste, it doesn't matter. Click in and out of the field, whatever you're scripting it to do, the automation is all happening in this bubble. And just like open record and commit record are explicit steps, the transaction basically gives you a nice wrapper for that whole thing. So it's really one of those, like, if you had $100 in your pocket, would you put it on the table and bet that your script isn't committing and you haven't used open and commit or transaction? If you have that confidence, great. If you don't have that confidence, then adopt those techniques and only commit when you want to. And that's really what it boils down to, is know when records are being committed and use the tools there to control when they're being committed. And you will not send data to the server or communicate to other users changes unless you want to.
Is there a list somewhere of the costs for different commands, script commands, a generalized list of the cost and time somewhere?
So the question is there a list of the general cost of script commands? And my understanding is no. There's lots of debates out there about which calculation functions and which script steps are the most expensive and which ones are more expensive and why. And all these are being done in tests that you hope are being done in a clean, sanitized, cache-free kind of environment, and that they're really good quality tests. But there's not an actual list out there that says, this is better than that. We could argue about is if better than case. There may be some that are kind of indisputable, but is let better than a bunch of set variables? Yeah, probably. They say it is. I'm sure someone has tested out there and found a situation where it wasn't, but most of the time it is. But there's no a ranking stack order that I'm aware of anywhere out there. So look at transactions, get to a place where you're confident about commits, wrap set field and other things that you're not sure about, or that you're not sure if Claris Engineering has updated them, even if you're in Claris Engineering, right? Because it's a big organization and things are changing, and that's good, which means they're kind of dividing and conquering. But I appreciate him coming up and sharing that, because it shows how fast they're changing and improving things to optimize and eliminate historical things that were expensive. He brought that to me as one of his two big concerns when I asked him about things. Calculations, I know I'm running long here, folks, but really good questions. I appreciate it. Calculations are everywhere. You've got to understand the functions. You have to try them out and learn which ones are smart. Case is better than if in general. Unstored calculations, we all kind of know already, are expensive. We've heard that in a lot of different contexts. They're unstored for a reason, because they're grabbing a bunch of related data is the common one, or the referencing a global field is another one. But the related one is the most common one I see, and that's where you start to cascade data. So there are other techniques for getting unstored calculations not be unstored. They're called caching techniques. Maybe at midnight, things run and cache results in a field, total sales. Like, are people buying stuff every minute, or are they buying them every day? Can you cache their total sales every night? Let the server work on that when no one's at the office. Next day you come in, everything is cached. It's stored in the actual record, or it's stored in a related record of sales. So when someone needs to see that data, it's ready for a report and doesn't have to be dynamically calculated on the fly. I don't have any examples of how to do caching well. Again, I think you'd find a lot of examples on the community, but like transactions, it's one of those scary, complicated things that will truly allow the solution you have built to continue to grow and scale and perform consistently, because you won't be, as it grows and grows, having more and more records that have to be summed up and added up over time. And ideally, you're building your solutions for businesses, whether they're yours or your customers, which are succeeding. So the total sales for a customer are getting bigger, the total items in inventory are getting bigger, the total number of items in the inventory are larger. All of those things are good signs, but those are the things that drive the worst parts of your solution to the surface. Summaries were asked about at the very beginning. Very powerful, very expensive, right? They summarize the found set. So you got to control when you show them, and you can't show them when you're not controlling the found set. We've got some solutions which bring up all time for the week for 20 developers. That's a lot of records. We don't show the summaries. If you want to see them, you ask for them, right? We have other solutions where instead of using summaries, we cache the data, and we just display that. There's even some neat techniques out there with summaries where if you have a summary field in a child table, you can display it on a parent table, same field, and it will give you the summary of the child records. So you want to know how many child records there are? Just put a summary that counts the total records in the child table in the child table. You probably need it there for a report anyway. And then just display it on the parent record and it'll tell you. One less field in your schema, right? You're not saving on the summary, it's still summarizing, but at least you're not having one more object in your table and making it that much wider and that much harder to maintain as a developer. You're getting 2 fields for the price of 1. It's a small tip, but it can be really useful because we often find ourselves unknowingly creating redundant fields this way with summaries. But like I said before, summaries, they're only expensive when you see them, so control when you see them, use them sparingly. They're really powerful, they're awesome, I love them. That's like my go-to whenever I'm trying to analyze data, just start creating a table view and summarizing, but I'm working with no latency on a small set of records on my computer with no other users. Not a big deal, I can afford to do that. All right, this is just a hand waving at all the other ways that FileMaker's been improving the platform since FileMaker 15. Caching on the client side, perform script on server, new calculation functions, new script steps, sorting and summarizing on the server, which is getting smarter whenever the server has capacity to do it for us, and the list goes on. I couldn't fit all the things that they've done on this slide. The key thing here is that they keep making improvements like that set field example, which just changed, right, when transactions came out and wasn't necessarily even heralded as an improvement. It just happened. See, even some of the caching of replaced field contents and importing, the fact that it's done in batches was something that was done years ago but wasn't necessarily reported. It was mentioned in presentations but never reported as a feature necessarily. But none of these things change the fundamentals. Are you sending the right records to your people or not? So if you're one of those people who doesn't want to start doing things, stop doing these things. Okay? Just stop these 5 or 6 things. Stop using custom formatting on layout objects a lot. Use it really carefully. Don't create wide tables. That's probably the most important one. Don't manipulate records you don't need to see, and that means use them, see them, interact with them. Just avoid them. Don't abuse summaries and unstored calculations. And like I said before, stop going to a layout and then entering find mode. Enter find mode and then go to a layout. They'll just feel snappier to your users. They don't know it, but they're getting data they're about to have disappear on them when you go to find mode. So why bother? This is Clay's comment. He wanted me to include this in the slide, or at least I think he did. I said, give me your #1 tip. Wide tables. To this day, when a real important solution for an important client or an important development company comes across his desk and makes it to Clay, this is what he sees a lot of the time. It's not the esoteric, exotic, strange thing. It's that table's got 200 or 400 or 600 fields. Why is that way?
What have you seen that's reasonable?
Like I said, I've got my own personal limit. I like to see tables sub 100. That to me just feels like I'm in the right ballpark of the fields I need for that table plus the necessary extra fields around it, like developer, get, created by, modified, things like a couple summaries to summarize data, maybe a few calcs that need to be stored or unstored to concatenate things. And it feels to me like, personally, my litmus test is like that 60 to 80 range for the fields I need, and it's kind of an upward limit, and then maybe 20 or so 30 fields above that for the overhead that's necessary. When I start to see lots of triple-digit tables, I start to wonder, is this thing normalized? I start to wonder if there's iterated fields when there should be a related table, right? Like if someone has decided to say, I don't know, I don't want to do student to classes, I want to do student to class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4, and they create all those fields in the student table. We've all seen that, where they have repeating fields when they should have related fields. Those are, to me, the indicators, John. But I don't think there's a hard set limit. I just think it's smaller is better, less is more. And smaller tables indicate a normalized solution to me at a glance. And likely someone who has tried, especially really small tables, I start to think, oh, they're isolating noisy fields. They're isolating large chunky fields. They're breaking fields into field sets and organizing them based on how they're consumed, even though they're all part of the same table. Those are the
Take on
indicators.
files versus tables.
Excuse me?
Creating new files as opposed to creating new tables.
So the question is creating new files or creating tables. I haven't really thought about this in the context of different files. I think a multi-file solution, if it's a necessary multi-file solution, the question would be how necessary was that? Is that a separation model that you're doing? That you're doing it because you have some security in one file that needs to be different than another file? Is it a legacy solution that has yet to be consolidated? But I think the same rules are going to apply, regardless of how many files you have or how many tables you have. If those files are single table files and they are really wide, you've got the same problem as if they're all in one file and they're really wide tables. Same situation. All right, here are some of the people you can hunt down. I don't know if I've seen all these folks here. Wim DeCourt, as you know, won an Excellence Award. He's a great resource. Steve Lane from Soliant is also a great resource. Not on there. Nick Lightbody, Daniel Wood. Hansa is zealous, advocating for improvements to the performance of the calculation engine. A lot of the training from Richard Carlton. These are all friendly competitors of Skeleton Key. There's stuff up there on FM Soup, the Chaos community, the knowledge bases. A lot of people out there who are really into performance, especially very unique scenarios and how to decipher them. I'm going to look at it much more from a holistic, big picture standpoint. Are we doing the basics? And if we're doing all the basics, which I'm going to tell you right now is almost never true, then I go to my engineering team and say, what's going on here? How can you optimize this? Maybe there's a better function. Maybe there's a different approach. Maybe there's something about the way they've structured the script that's kind of suboptimal. But usually it's the basics. Wide tables, noisy fields, data they don't need, not using transactions. These are the things that almost instantly pop to the top, or really complicated relationship graphs. I'm happy to help. Those are links in the PDF that you can download from the app. Happy to meet with anyone and talk about the solution, help evaluate what's going on. You can schedule a meeting with me. You can email me. You can reach out to my team. Please take a minute before you dash over for drinks and food to rate the session. It takes 2 seconds if you haven't rated one yet. Really helps us evaluate the content and me as a speaker. Yes, sir.
On a performance script on server, say it's processing, creating records over 5 tables. Would you do a transaction with that on server?
I wouldn't worry about that, especially if it's creating records. So the question is, should I use a transaction when performing script on server to create new records? So my non-engineering answer would be, just from this concepts and themes, you're making new records so no one's getting them. So I'm not really worried about committing and communication.
Updating 10 records in a couple different tables, would you do a transaction?
Then my next question would be, so probably the short answer is yes, no harm in doing it, right? Nothing ventured, nothing gained, you might as well. It's a couple script steps, open the transaction and the transaction. The other question that would come up for me is there's other reasons to do transactions, right? In terms of record locking, right? And being able to control modifications, to roll back and revert changes, to ensure conditions exist to make it safe to make those changes before you commit them, or to do a bundle of related records. So there's a lot of other good reasons to do transactions that might outweigh just avoiding communications. If you are modifying those records on the server, it's the same thing I said before. Anyone who had those records is going to be told there's been a change. If they're not using those records right now or seeing those records right now, all they're going to get told is dump it, you don't need it anymore. So a very small text message. But anyone who's looking at those records, they're going to get the new bundle. And so a lot of it comes down to what are you trying to achieve with those batches of changes on the server? And do you want them to all appear at the same time, or should they appear as they happen? And again, how confident are you that you know when things are being committed even on the server? The server is just another user, right? I mean, that's the way I try to think about it, is what's the server doing if a user was doing it?
Hi, same as PSOS question. How do I control PSOS not flooding the server?
Say that again?
Like not use too much, like use too many, they all commit PSOS call.
So how do you avoid too much activity for PSOS on the server and overwhelming the server? It's a great question, and I'm not the right guy to answer it. There's no real way, I think, for the client to know, and I could be wrong about this unless someone's aware of a get function out there that'll tell me how many PSOS sessions are running on the server at any given moment. And I'm not even entirely sure, I'm pretty sure they're multi-threaded, which means there could be multiple PSOS operations being executed. But at what point do you run into a bottleneck? I couldn't say. I do know that, I believe it's, I'm going to get his name wrong, Steve Wilmer is doing a session on using PSOS and being able to walk away and even log out of your solution, but still be aware of when it's completed successfully what it's trying to do. Say again? Steve Winter, I think it might be him, yes. So hang around for a minute, I'll find that session, but there's a gentleman who's doing a session, it might have been today, but I think it might be tomorrow. Is that it? He did it today? Yeah, so there'll be a recording and there's slides about that, but I think he specifically gets into how to optimize for PSOS, and he'd be a great resource to ask about. But I don't think there's any way for you to know before you're about to fire something off, whether you're about to send it to the end of a long queue of other work being done on the server, or whether or not it's going to go right through. I know if... Yeah. That would be a great question to pin down the engineers on that as well. Yes, sir.
Can you just go back one slide?
You just picture my family? That's even from a couple years ago. They're all taller than me now. So the 15-year-old's the tallest, strangely. All right. I know I kept you guys late. Thank you very much for your questions and your time. Have a great evening.